Good morning, family. To our visitors, we'd like to thank you for coming, let you know that you're our honored guest. If there's anything that we can do to assist you, please let us know. We want to welcome those who have joined us on live stream as well. Our text today, and thank Greg for reading it, is in Exodus, the 33rd chapter, and we'll be looking at verses 18 through 23. And also, we'll be looking at verses 34, 1 through 4. And I've entitled this lesson, Show Me Thy Glory. Now, we have been walking along the path of life just kind of gradually. And as we walk, we don't always see the goodness of God. Somehow, we have forgotten about all the goodness that God displays to us continually. The fact that we had beautiful blue skies all summer long. We forgot about the incredible sunsets that we experience every day. And if we were talking about the goodness of God when it comes down to food that he allows us to eat, we'd all go on diets. I mean, we just came from this Thanksgiving holiday, and I'm sure there was a very good feast in a lot of households. And God allowed that. Think about all the apples that you've ever eaten. Think about all the bread that you've ate, all the vegetables, all the meat that you have consumed. And I suppose that each one of us have eaten orchards of apples and oranges. If we were to add up all the beef that we have consumed, we say we'd ate a herd of cattle. And when you think about all that God do, it's just because it's goodness. God's goodness surrounds us in every facet of life. You know, when we look at the theme of the book of Exodus, that theme has been said that it was the liberation of God's people. How God's people moved from enslavement to emancipation to empowerment. But I'd like for you to consider, or for us to consider this morning, that it could also be a theme of the manifestation of the presence of God. And God is using this situation to showcase his power, to showcase his majesty, to showcase his splendor. I'd like for us to consider it. God is showing his presence to a people who did not know him. And how do you say that? Well, consider the conversation that God had with Moses back in Exodus chapter 3, in verses 13 through 15. Moses asked God, who do I tell the people sent me? And how did God respond? God says, I am the Father, the God of thy fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They didn't know him. But do we know him? See, God was the God of their forefathers. And that's kind of significant to the text, you know, because essentially God had a covenant with their forefathers. So God was blessing them on the behalf of others. And as I think about it, as I sit here, you know, sometimes we say we have favor of the Lord. But do we have favor because we know God? Or do we have favor because someone else has been praying to God on our behalf. So you have grandparents that have prayed for you from the time you was that high all the way up to here. You had parents who continually prayed for you most of the days of your life. You have people that's praying for you at this very moment, and God is blessing you and me on the behalf of prayers of someone else. So we have to relook at our relationship with God. People are praying on our behalf. But again, we should be praying people. And not the type of people who pray for just material things. We need to be a praying people that pray for spiritual things more than material things. See, the material things are going to stay right here. But the spiritual things can carry us into glory. But when you think about Moses, Moses had a relationship with God. No doubt, Moses seen the plagues. Moses seen God working throughout the whole situation. Can you imagine Moses and that scene and God led them to the Red Sea and parted the sea and everyone crossed on dry land? And so Moses had a relationship with God. He knew of God. So what is he asking God in our passage? If you look back, in this same chapter, we can see what he's asking for. And I want you to keep in mind that when I say Moses had a relationship with God, it's because in chapter 32, verses 1 through 4, Moses had actually interceded for the people. Remember when God was going to kill him? And Moses spoke with God and convinced God not to kill him. But Moses is asking for something else. And so what is he asking for? And I want you to consider that he's asking for a deeper relationship with God. Look at verse 11 of chapter 33. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he returned again into the camp, but his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou say, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in thy sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me thy way, that I may know thee, that I may know thy grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And he said, My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest." Moses was asking God for a deeper relationship with him. When was the last time we asked God for a deeper relationship? See, in Moses' eyes, I seen the plagues, God. I seen everything that you did, but I really don't know you. And I want to know you. I want to know you in the same instance that Adam knew you. Can you imagine being in the garden and you wake up and God is there, and you walking with God and you talking with God, and you having this constant fellowship with God because I know that you're there. But that's called faith, right? Moses was asking him, let me see you on earth as you are in heaven. I want to see you in your natural habitat. I want to have this deep relationship with you. I'm longing for it, Lord. This is my desire. Not material, but spiritual. And when I consider asking God for such a relationship, it's some things that I have to realize. It's some things that you have to put into perspective before you ask God that type of question. And the first thing that I have to realize is that I am not in charge. I belong to him. See, we sing songs, where he leads me, I will follow. I've been singing that all my life. But will I really follow the Lord? I have to realize that it's not my will, but his will is done. So yes, I'm going to be in some uncomfortable situations. I have to realize that the church is not my church. It's his church. Every now and then I got to go back to Matthew 16 and 18 and realize what Jesus says. See, I'm good to tell people about the one true church, but do I really get it? And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. On this rock I have built my church. It's not your church. So guess what? I don't get my way. I have to move to the situation where I don't have to have my way. Let thy will be done in order to show and see the presence of God. But I want to bring you 3 points, and I'm not going to be too long. But I want to make sure that we don't be like the children of Israel. See, the children of Israel was in the presence of God, but God could not do enough for them. All that he did was not enough. And we don't want to be people like that. And so I want you to consider 3 points. And the first point that I want you to consider is the goodness of God. Now I want you to see something in verse 19. God says, I will make my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. He says, and he said, thou cannot see my face, but there shall no man see me and live. See, Moses asked for one thing, but God gave him something else. Moses requests glory, but God showed him goodness, because his goodness is the expression of his glory. And I want you to think about it. You can sit there silent, but think about it. Haven't God been good to us? And if he's been good to you, you've seen his glory in a spiritual sense, as well as a physical sense. See, goodness is not a fruit of God's action. It's a fruit of God's nature. It's an attribute. And see, when God does something for us, he extends himself to us. Now, I want you to consider Matthew chapter 11 in verses 28 through 30. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. I wasn't going to turn there, but I feel kind of compelled to. What does Jesus say? And we all know this passage. Jesus says, come unto me, all ye that labor are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Can you see God extending himself to you? Come unto me, all ye. It doesn't matter if you are poor. It doesn't matter if you are destitute. It doesn't matter if you're alone. I'm extending his hand. Just come on. I'm going to give you some rest. I want you to take my yoke upon you and learn of me. It doesn't matter if I have all the treasures in the world. It doesn't matter if I'm a Bill Gates, because let me tell you something. You can have all the things that you want and still be miserable. Because our souls requires that rest that only comes through the Lord. Come unto me, all ye, not some of you, not most of you, but all ye who are laboring, are heavy laden. Don't we all have burdens? Is there anyone in here that hadn't been heavily laden and did not need the rest that God provides? I don't think so. There's no one in the world. You can only find true rest in Jesus. He says, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God has extended himself to us at this very hour, which is such a great blessing. He's good in his goodness and in his being. Now, let me give you an example of this. Last couple of days has been cloudy, right? Overcast, dreary, miserable. Someone said to me, this was some good sleeping weather. But just because we couldn't see the sun doesn't mean the sun was not there. It was overcast, it was cloudy, it was raining, but it was what? It was still light. So what you saying, Brother Martin? What I'm saying is when you go through something and you start to think, because Satan put in your mind, God is not there. He is there. He is present. He is able. But more importantly, he's working things out on our behalf. We got to remember that. Just because we go through trials and tribulations doesn't mean that God is not there. God is there. He's with us. Matthew 5:14 says, for he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends his rain on the just and the unjust. And so what I want you to understand is, oh, taste the Lord and see that he's good. What did the psalmist say? In Psalms 23, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall what? Dwell in the house of the Lord. Goodness and mercy. He started off by telling Moses, I'm going to have goodness and mercy on whom I choose. Think about the goodness of God. But then, I want you to consider something else. I want you to consider the guardianship of the Lord. See, when Moses made his request to see God's glory, I don't think that he fully understood what he was asking God. See, if God showed him the fullness of his glory, he would die. What did God say? No one can see my face and live. You can't see my glory. It's too consuming. And sometimes we have why question in life. Why this? Why that? Some things just have to be a mystery. We don't always have to know why. When I was growing up, we couldn't hardly ask why. If I asked my mom why, she'd say, because I said so. And that was the end of the conversation. And then at the end of that conversation, I got a look, and that look said, don't you ever ask me that again. It ain't your job to know why. And sometimes we just have to be like that with God. You know? I don't need to understand every passage. I don't need to understand everything that's going on in my life. I just need to trust him and know that it's working out for my good. See, God's glory is so brilliant and so wonderful that it just consumes you. Think about it. It's kind of like standing next to the sun. The sun is so bright and radiant that if you stand close to it, you'd evaporate it. And so, Moses asked God this question, I want to see your face, but God said, hey, let me let you in on a secret. If you see me in the fullness of my glory, it's going to kill you. You're going to die. So what did God do in Estes? God guarded him against himself. Can't give you what you want, Moses. So what can I take out of that? Sometimes we ask God for things and God tells us no. And if we're honest with ourselves, most of the time we get upset when God says no. It's okay when he says yeah. We have a problem with waiting, and we have a problem definitely with no. Well, you don't love me. We just like little kids. You don't love me, you told me no. I told you no because if I gave you what you actually wanted, it would kill you. Physically and spiritually. But especially spiritually. Now, can I get personal with you? Let's get personal. We family, right? Grace, we family. In the relationships that you had, and I'm talking to the adults, and young people pay attention. You met somebody and you fell in love. And that was the one. I can't live without you. But it didn't work out. And you was wondering, for a Christian, I prayed to God about that. Y'all don't tell nobody. Because I really thought that was the one. And you fast forward 5 years, and you look back and you go, phew. I'm glad God didn't give me that person. So what's the message? The message is, with everything that you do, pray. Young people, you're getting to that age, and you're thinking about relationships, don't become a statistic. The statistic of being divorced and marrying the wrong person. Pray to God. And when you pray, have your eyes open. Pay attention to the signs that the Lord gives you. And when you see them signs, it's okay to run away. That's wisdom. Because I'm going to be honest with you. You 5 years down the road, you find yourself struggling over, am I scripturally divorced? And all those issues. So pay attention. That one was for free. That wasn't even a part of my lesson. Being people who pray. God knows what's best. So we got our prayer according to his will. 1 John chapter 5, verse 14. And this is the confidence that we have in him. That if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. We got to have confidence, but we got to ask according to God's will. Make sure you know what you're asking for, God for. And then the Spirit plays a part in that too. Romans 8, 26 and 27 says, likewise, the Spirit also helps in our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercessions for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the heart knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercessions for the saints according to the will of God. So see, when you get down on your knees and you start praying and it's coming out, I thank God for his infinite wisdom, because by the time it gets to God, it be presentable to God. That's a prayer life. See, if you have a prayer life, your life will become prayer. Be careful what you ask God for. Consider some of those things. God is guarding us. So, you went through all that. How did he guard Moses? He didn't give him the desires of his heart. He protected Moses from himself. See, God guides us from the perils of our petition. See, God knew how much of himself that Moses could handle. Now let me clear this up. Think about the angels in Isaiah 6 in verse 2. They were called seraphims. In verse 2 it says, above him was seraphs, each with 6 wings. 2 wings covered their face, 2 wings covered their feet, and with 2 wings they were flying. They had to cover their face and their feet when they came into the presence of God. That's why God was so powerful. They had to do that. He's holy. He's awesome. They couldn't consume him. So I want you to consider what he did right quick in verses 21 through 23. Notice what God did. He gave Moses a gracious concealment of his glory. So he took Moses and he put him in the crevice of the rock. I'm going to take you, I'm going to put you in this crevice. And Moses was hidden. Then he took his hand and he put it in front of Moses' face. So Moses couldn't see anything. See, that's guardianship. Then he passed by and he only let Moses see his back parts. He guarded him. We sing that song, he hided my soul in the cleft of the rock. Moses seen a shadow of God's glory because God guarded him from hurt, harm, and danger. And then I want you to consider as I go to a closing, grace. God graciously concealed Moses. His request was noble. Our request could be noble, but it was also fatal for him to see God's face. And so I want you to see the grace, and I want you to see the Christ, and then the message will be yours. In chapter 34, in verse 1, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon them these tables the words that were in the first tablets which thou breakest. And be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai, and present thyself there to me in the top of the mountain. And no man shall come up with thee, neither let any man be seen throughout all the mount, neither let the flocks nor the herd feed before the mount. And he hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first. And Moses rose up early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai, and the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hands the 2 tables of stone." Grace. God gave him grace. Moses deserved punishment, but God gave him grace. He deserved punishment, but God pardoned him. Now, this is the second time within this text that God saved Moses. First time he saved him when he wouldn't allow him to see his face. The second time he is saving him because he broke his commandments. That's grace. Should add some punishment. Saved him from his fate, and now he's going to save him from his faults. Remember back in Exodus chapter 32 and verse 19, when Moses became angry with the people? And what did Moses do? He broke God's commandments. And that's why God told him, okay, I want you to take 2 new tablets, because you broke the first ones. I'm showing you grace. You did what you wasn't supposed to do, but I'm going to give you another chance. You want to see my glory, and I let you see my back parts. You want this relationship with me, and what comes with this relationship is obedience. Since we one-on-one right now, don't let nobody make you break God's law. If you're going to be one-on-one with the Lord. Don't let no one persuade you young people to do something that you know that's contrary to God's law. Don't let no one make you so angry that you're going to lose your self-control and do something that you should not do. Grace. We're in a relationship now, Moses. So when you're in a relationship with me, you got to realize when you do right, but you got to realize when you do wrong, and then you got to adjust. I'm going to give you some rules here. Come by yourself. Get up early in the morning. Climb up this mountain. Don't bring nothing with you. And then I'm going to redo what you broke. Grace. Giving you another chance. But also said, I want you to see the Christ in the text. In between God's glory and Moses' restoration. Now get ready for this. God put body parts on a spirit. Uh-oh. God used a hand, a back, and a face. So how did he do that? He put his hand over the crevice in the rock. He turned his face away from Moses so he couldn't see it. And he allowed Moses to see what? The back of him while he passed by. Brother Mark, you said you was going to show me Jesus in this. Here come the Christ. Jesus was a hand, a back, and a face. In John chapter 1, in verse 1, John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Spirit. In verse 14, he says, same chapter, and a Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld the glory. The glory is the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. See, Jesus was a spirit that put on a body that stepped in and saved all of us in the entire world. I want you to see this. See, his hands were nailed to the cross for the sins of mankind. His back had welts on it from the beating that he took for my sins. His face, his head, had a crown of thorns where they marked him. And he did that for me. And I know he did it for us. If I want to see God's glory, I had to make it personal. And we need to make our relationship with God very personal. I want to know you. I know you know me, but I want to know you. I want to get in this intimate relationship with you. That's grace. But my question this morning is, what are you going to do with Jesus? Is Jesus going to be your Lord and Savior? Is Jesus going to be your master? Is Jesus going to be your all in all? What are you going to do with Jesus? Am I just going to reach for Jesus when it's an emergency and something going on and I got to pray? That's when I need Jesus. Am I going to take Jesus and put him in a little box? You know, kind of like the sign he said, break glass in the case of emergency. What are you going to do with Jesus? See, he's still calling us. He's still loving us. He still wants us to come home. And if you're here and you hadn't obeyed the gospel, don't let your back be glued to a chair and your feet so firm in the ground that you cannot get up and respond to the gospel call. Because he's calling. We have invitation, and I want to invite you to come by faith, believing in Jesus, being willing to repent of your sins, confessing them, and putting them on in baptism, and living faithfully. And if you've been baptized, what are you going to do with Jesus? We sit here, we hear message after message, we hear sermons, we sit through classes. But when the word convicts us, and we know that it convicts us, are we willing to change? Because that's all a part of seeing God's glory. When I see God's glory and I know that I'm not thinking right and I'm not acting right and I'm not living right, it compels me to change. And we have the opportunity. May God bless us. If you stand subject to the invitation, please let your request be made known as we stand and sing the song.
When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more.